Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. I'm Chris DeSantis. I have a guest on this week. I'm really excited about it. People know that usually this podcast format is myself and Eric and Joel, but this week I have Nikki Kett on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to her about a lot of stuff. So welcome, Nikki. You are what? You are the founder of Nikki Kett Coaching. Like, what do you call yourself for a job title?
That's a good question. I'm shifting from a coach who makes money to seeing myself as a CEO of a business. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, I want to know more about that because sometimes this podcast format turns into Chris solicits free business advice. And I think I sort of got plugged back into you recently. And it's just so interesting when you get, I remember probably our history. Well, our history doesn't begin with this point, but at some point I referenced that you were going this way on a podcast, and I gave you a hard time about the fact that, you stole my original idea of putting your name and then coaching afterwards for a.
I remember seeing that. I think it was on Swim, and you're like, very original, Nikki Kett Coaching. And then I saw your business name, and I was like, well, same thing.
Sometimes all my closest friends go, sometimes, Chris, maybe you should remind people that making fun of them is something you do like when you like somebody, right? And I go, yeah, I guess so. But also, I don't know. It's sort of a filtering process for friends for me. Like once people figure out that that's a reason why I like them, then we're sort of off to the races in terms of a relationship. But so give us a little bit of background. And I will just say, before you talk in general about what it is you do, people that listen to this podcast or people that know me know that I'm like probably a very harsh critic of anybody that steps into the space that you're stepping into. And I want to say enthusiastically, I'm reading your stuff and I'm like, this is really good. So tell people a little bit, like what is Nikki Kett Coaching all about?
Yeah. Well, thank you first for having me and for the encouragement. When I left coaching at Michigan, it kind of started off as helping women grow their confidence. And because my network is a lot of athletes and former athletes, and I worked with a couple college teams last year, I was really healing from my time in elite sport. And I noticed that a lot of the women had, when we're in coaching, we're dealing with a lot of subconscious beliefs and rewiring the brain and the mindset, also processing emotions in the body that keep us stuck. And so over about a year, I finally realized, like, holy shit, we all have internalized so many things from sport that really holds us back from expressing our full potential. And I work specifically with women, so it's got a little bit of women's empowerment flair, feminism, patriarchy built in, but it does impact men as well. But yeah, I've just really, my background before this, doing almost a decade of coaching at Johns Hopkins, Penn, and then Michigan, very elite institutions. And I also studied sports psychology, but also organizational dynamics. So really reflecting how culture impacts the individual, their motivation, what's happening for them. And the more that I think about what do I really believe, how can we actually support athletes, not just when they're in sport, but unwinding from it, we have to look at the cultures that create the conditioning that we carry around with us after or in sport or after sport. So that's kind of where I'm at now. It's been almost 19 months since leaving collegiate coaching and starting this business. And so it has been an evolution. I think the more healing that I've done for myself, the more I'm just willing to be open and share. And I didn't have that awareness right after leaving. I was just kind of like, what am I going to do?
Right.
Start a coaching business because I love personal development and helping people grow. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I think you'd like, I mean, I can remember going off on my own and having a sense that I could help people, but that there is a stage of development where you actually start doing the work and then you find out sort of more specifically, like what it is you can help with. And I can see that in what you're doing. Now, I've started at the end, right? And so what I would like for you to fill people on, because I have a little bit of a sense of it, but sometimes I forget what my audience doesn't know, right? You reference like you stopped coaching at Michigan, you started this job, you had this history as a collegiate swim coach at really elite places. We have one of those in common, Penn, and I definitely want to get to that later because I think there's some really interesting things to talk about. But just like give people an idea, I guess, of what the range of that experience was, right? Being a coach in elite swimming settings. What were the highs? What were the lows? What were the really important parts to your story that inform what you do now?
Yeah. I think each place I was at taught me a lot. At Johns Hopkins, working with George Kennedy, we really worked well together. And so much of what we did, my second year there, I will always remember we had our women's program won 5 relays at NCAAs, which
Wow.
was pretty unheard of the year before we won our first ever.
Yeah.
And so really just thinking about how we did that it was all about empowering women, and something that George really believed in is helping them believe in themselves, giving them confidence. And there were still, the normal challenges. We had people quitting, and because it's a rigorous place to go to school, lots of engineers and pre-med. But I think that was good. Like we believed in addition through subtraction. Like we supported people when they felt like they didn't want to be a part of that culture. And I think that allowed us to create a really great culture of people that want to be there. I would say the Ivy League is similar to D3 in that there are in scholarships. I think, Penn.
Can I just interject one thing? Because you talk about George Kennedy. I want to echo your point. I'm so jealous, by the way. I have to admit, I'm very, very jealous that you got the opportunity to work for George. I'm jealous of all the people that got to be an assistant coach of George, because I really wanted to do that. But even despite the fact that I didn't get to, I was just taking a shower. I was worked out. I'd taken a shower before this, and I was thinking, like, if I had to make a Mount Rushmore of men in the sport of swimming that have provided really positive mentorship to me, George Kennedy would be on there. I ought to write him a letter, I think, probably after this, and just remind him, because I think of him all the time. I'm really grateful for some moments where I think he had this beautiful sense of leadership, and leadership being that I'm going to use sort of the power and influence I have to help people that that are having a hard time with what they're doing right now. I'm going to lift them up. And I know that he did that for me. So I'm very jealous of the George Kennedy piece of this, and I don't want to miss the opportunity before you go on to Penn to talk a little bit about George. But please continue with the transition to Penn.
We'll send this to George as
well. Let's send it to him. And then I don't need to send him a letter. He can just hear me talk about it.
But yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't have stayed in coaching as long as I did if it weren't for him. Like, he really empowered me to believe in myself. He's like, you're an amazing coach. You really have something to offer. First day on the job, like, I didn't have any coaching experience. I was just graduating from Kenyon, and he really listened. Like, he really wanted to hear my perspective, what I had to say. And we didn't agree on everything. Sometimes we sometimes I challenged him, and we would respect each other enough to be able to have those conversations. And I learned a lot from that. I was 22. So a lot of the athletes were similar in age to me. So I was really grateful that that was my first real world job and coaching position.
Yeah.
Um,
So you go on to Penn. Penn is similar to Hopkins. I actually tried to go the other direction when I tell that story. Like I tried to go from Penn to Hopkins because I so much wanted to be around George. But what was in your mind when you said, "Okay, I'm going to make this jump to D1"? Because I think too that sometimes can be a barrier. Like I don't think in that case, because of some of the similarities between the two places, it's a more natural transition to make. But what was in your mind at that time when you were like, "Okay, this is the next step for me"? And then what did you experience? I would say,
there were a lot of factors. I think George knew he was going to retire in a couple years. So there was, for a while, I thought that I would stay Division III forever and take over. And there were some, presidential changes at Hopkins where we weren't getting the support in recruiting. And I just was like, I don't know if I want to have this be like my first head coaching experience with the way things were going. So actually, Mark Christian, I don't know if you know Mark, but he also swam at Kenyon. So he kind of recruited me to Penn, and we really, I just love learning and knowledge. And I had just finished one master's degree, but he's like, you should come to Penn. We can work together. And you can also, which I know you took advantage of when you were at Penn, have the opportunity to apply for a grad program, and, they cover your tuition. So
I didn't get mine paid for because I was a part-time employee. You've touched on a sore point.
Oh no.
I had to pay the full price. At least it was only 1 year.
That was definitely a drawing point for me. I wanted to live in a city. I felt like I still wanted to be at a place that valued academics and not just only the swimming piece. So it felt like the next step. I felt comfortable with that. And I think Penn had different challenges. The environment was fun. Like we didn't put tons of pressure on winning. But I definitely, looking back, realized that there were things that impacted me when I worked there. In just the culture, I think there and the Ivy League can be a bit of a good old boys club, and just comments about women and bodies and how the men's team talked. For a while I thought it was really funny, and I can joke around, I can have a good laugh, but I think by the end of it, there were some struggles that I had with allowing that to continue, which just wasn't what I believed in and how I wanted to lead and coach. And so I feel like I woke up one day, I was like, I don't know that this is helping me. I feel very obsessive about my body. And at the same time, I was in this program, this amazing grad program, where I was so supported, and my professors are like, you are so brilliant. You have brilliant ideas. And it was all about leadership and culture and awareness. And I feel like every class I took at Penn, I got an A or an A+ in, not in a perfectionist way, just because I love the material so much. And it was really interesting afterwards and like towards the end of that experience to reflect on what I was learning in grad school about how culture impacts the way people show up.
Yeah.
And how leadership impacts the way people show up. And I realized just how much shit I had internalized. And that was something that was really hard when, then I get hired at Michigan because of a lot of the reason was because of my educational background, and having the organizational dynamics and sports psych. And so I kind of was brought in to work on some cultural things, but honestly,
I just want to interject because I want
yeah,
to pump you up a little bit too, because you're right. I bet that is a big reason why you got hired. But as somebody that used to coach at Penn, I want to give you the credit as well that when I was there, we were kind of like a average to bottom Ivy League team. We hadn't qualified anybody for the Ben's NCAA meet, I think for like 15, 20 years, something like that. And you were there and you were part of a time when Penn changed into what it is today, where competitively, like there are high achieving swimmers year in, year out at Penn. That's something that's different than when I coached there. So I think that probably played a role in Michigan as well. That it wasn't like you were coming from some, bottom tier Division I environment. You had shown coaching wise that you could get people to be competitive all the way up at the top of the NCAA level. So it was a natural fit then also to go to Michigan.
Yeah, and I think Penn did help me grow my confidence as a coach in a lot of ways because I had my own group. I really worked with sprint and middle distance on the women's side, and I feel like I got to experience putting my philosophy into a group and kind of it's like when you have a culture where different coaches have different groups, it's like little microcosms of cultures within the greater culture. And so I felt like that was something that I could really control every day. And I did enjoy the recruiting and building the relationships that I did when I was at Penn, because I think it's a very specific niche that you're recruiting. So it's not like you're casting this huge net to anyone and everyone. So I had fun with that. It was, we're always trying to out recruit Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. But there were a lot of things that I took from my experience at Penn. Well, also, when I was really excited to go to Michigan because it was a place that, it was the highest level. And I had some reservations beforehand. Like, is this going to be right for me? Because I swam in D3. I coached in D3. I really knew myself. I know why I'm coaching. I'm coaching to help people grow.
Yeah.
And I can help people grow by helping them learn how to win. But I will never compromise that piece. And I'm sure, I've gotten out of balance at points or not had that awareness, or we all have. But at the end of the day, the reason why I wanted to coach is because really when I was at Kenyon, my time had just transformed me so much as a human that's why I wanted to be in collegiate coaching.
You had that perspective, like you, and that was important to you. You wanted to hold on to that. And I think that's pretty natural. I definitely, it's almost even as you're describing it, and we'll talk about this in some of your posts too, I can hear a little bit of that imposter syndrome coming in too. Like, poor me, Division III me, like, am I really cut out for this top competitive level, right? I mean, I was a Division III swimmer as well, and I've learned not to talk down my own swimming accomplishments. It took me a long, long time to do it, to not just say like, oh, I wasn't very good. Heck yeah, I was good. I'm better at swimming than 99% of the people that try swimming. Like, it's so ridiculous for anybody to say that. But like, when you get up to that level, it warps your mind. You start thinking like, well, I'm not quite as good as this person that's trying to go to the Olympics. So like, I guess I'm not good,
Yeah. And I think like, I in my post talk a lot about perfectionism, and it's not it wasn't all or nothing. Like I
Right.
did really believe in the value that I had and my perspective, but I also had this other side of me that was dealing with the imposter syndrome or dealing with things that I had internalized as a woman being in sport, or just in general. I was 25 to 28 at Penn, so going through your 20s, you're still figuring things out. Even
Yeah.
in your 30s and 40s, we're all always figuring things out.
Yep.
But I really did believe in that perspective. And when I went into Michigan and interviewed, I really said to myself, like, I'm going to share exactly who I am. I'm not going to try to be anything other than me. I'm going to share what I think I can add here. And at that point, I was considering, like, do I want to go the coaching consulting route? Do I want to consider doing a shift, a career shift, or do I want to stay in collegiate coaching? And then the opportunity presented itself. I ended up getting the job, and I was like, you know what? Whatever happens, I'm going to learn a lot. So I took the job, and yeah, I think I really did come in with that. These are my ideas. This is how I can help. I really deeply believe that I could help, but it was a challenge. I would say the first month or so, like sharing what I shared about my experience at Hopkins and empowering women and helping them. And we wanted to shift the culture of the women's program at Michigan to feel more like a team environment and to not feel so harsh. And I talked about this, like, confidence and empowerment. And what I got was, Nikki, that's Division III. That does not work here. And it's just, my response was, but humans are humans, right? Like, human psychology is human psychology, whether you're in D3, you're in the Ivy League, you're in D1. But it's so hard to lose. It's so easy to lose sight of that when your brain's in survival and you're like, but I have to win. And if I don't win, then what happens? And then we have to, like, manipulate, control, force athletes, create this harsh pressured culture. And that's what the brain thinks is going to be most effective to build a culture. And it just doesn't work that way. But I really struggled to be able to, partially it's on me because I didn't always have it in me to continue fighting back. And I felt like I was in between a rock and a hard place. Like, we want you to do this, but at the same time, it's like, shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, why am I even here then?
Right.
So it was an interesting experience for 3 years.
Yeah, and I think, like, this definitely provides, and we're about to segue into some more specifics and that you've talked about. I'm going to bring up some social media posts, but I think one thing I want to echo in what you said is even if I go back to my experience, also coaching in college and hearing other coaches, like, I think probably in coaching, the number one way knowledge is shared is coach to coach. Like, do we have a mentorship model? Like, somebody else tells you, like, hey, here's how you do this thing. And you go, okay, that's interesting. And you try it. Maybe, depending on what I'm about to say, you might not want to try it, right? But then you sort of iterate and you go your own direction with it. I can't tell you how many people, when I was a Division I combined coach, would just look at me at the eye and essentially give me some version of, here's how you coach women. You're cruel to them. You're mean to them. You, like, manipulate them into doing what you want. And that's just how it is. That's how you coach women. And I remember the whole time thinking, like, that can't be right. That can't be right. And yet everybody who I'm looking to for that mentorship, that's what they're telling me is the way to do it. So I can very easily see how that becomes, like, predominant in the culture. This is how it is. This is the way. And there's people I think, all around there who they have to be having the same thought that I'm having, that I think you've had as well, that goes, that can't be right. And I think you maybe even take it a step further, goes, I know that's not right. Here's what's right.
Yeah.
But before we get into the specific post, I do want to give you a little bit more opportunity to promote what you're doing. So given all that experience, given what you told me in the beginning about what it is you do, like what does a really successful Nikki Kett coaching client look like? Give me some examples. So maybe if people listening to this know somebody, or they are somebody who could get a lot out of working from you, like what would that look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the reasons I am willing to speak up and share is because I know that I'm not alone. And a lot of my clients are elite coaches because that was my network, whether it's club coaches or they're coaching in the Power Five. And they have a lot of, they're very educated. They might have degrees in counseling, they're smart, ambitious women, and they want to make an impact. And I think one of the things that I've realized is I have to go first in sharing the truth, because a lot of the women I coach are in the exact same situation that I was in, where they care. They want to empower women. They want to empower men. They want to change culture. They want to win, but they also have empathy. And, I've done a lot of human design and more of that work with myself. And one of my gifts is my intuition, like deeply knowing. And I think that is what I struggled with, was really listening to, I knew that things were not right, but I didn't trust myself in that. And so I didn't always speak up, and I just internalized a lot of shame. I felt very small. I felt like I wasn't using my gift to actually impact people. And that's what I help women do, whether they're a doctor who's struggling to really know what their gift is and share that, and to set boundaries around their energy, because our energy is really important too. We end up taking so much shit on. It's like, okay, well, if you're not going to listen to my perspective, well, then I better put my head down and like do something so that you actually think I'm valuable here, even though I'm not actually allowed to like coach or like do really whatever. That the women work, the more we go through the coaching process, which is really helping them see their limitations in their mind and how they're suppressing themselves. It's really about empowering them to speak up so that they can continue to have that impact, even when they're maybe the only woman that has that perspective, or the only person that is saying what they're saying. It's being willing to just stand that ground, to hold that space, and to have a different perspective, and not make yourself wrong for having a different perspective, but to say, hey, I actually have a lot of value because I have a different perspective, and because I'm not willing to just say yes to what everybody else is doing around me.
Yeah. So and now I'm going to transition to your post, and what you just said makes me think of is a point that I have always made. And I think this is along the lines of, I do consider myself a feminist. And I think one of the mistakes that, or sort of gaps in leadership we have in sort of male society writ large, is that we fail to, we look at feminism as something that's a threat to what we are, instead of seeing so many aspects of it as mutually beneficial. Like there's an absolute positive case to be made for the things that you're talking about there. And like one of them is, for instance, if I really like, why do I coach swimming? Why am I involved in the sport of swimming? I love swimming to death as a sport. I want it to be amazing. I want it to be an amazing environment for people to be it. On a basic fundamental level, having like a very narrow group of people with a very narrow set of experiences control the experience of what it is to be in swimming cannot possibly create the best possible experience. It just can't. Like that's not how great ideas come. Just by like, you know what, we'll just take like 10% of the population and those will be the only people who get to contribute ideas. It just doesn't make any sense. And so let's get into one of these posts that I think speaks to exactly what you're saying. These are things you've shared on Instagram, and there's some specifics in here that I think are worth highlighting. So the first one that I think references what you just said starts with, women are rarely given the opportunity to express the genius that lives inside them. And you don't need to read the whole post out loud, but like give people a little bit of a sense of what you were discussing there and some of the experiences you were drawing upon.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's coming up for me is like it really goes back to the patriarchal society that we live in, and really what happens is we live in this culture where nothing is ever enough. Like I'm not good enough. I don't have enough achievements, and our worth for men and for women is like, well, what have you done? And not being able to see the person behind that. And I think it creates a very hierarchical structure where it's like, I'm either better than you and you're here. So it's like power over and less than. But that really internally is coming from insecurity and not just being okay. Like trying to win from that place is always generated from negative emotion, like scarcity. I'm not good enough. I need my athlete to win, perform, achieve in order for me to feel okay with myself. And I think that it's a lot of masculine energy, like constantly doing, achieving, performing, never slowing down, never stopping to reflect. And that's what the feminine is like, we can slow down, we can have empathy, we can sit in our emotions, we can see that my belief is that swimming is the most overtrained sport. And if we spent maybe 20% less time training and working on our emotions and our mind and getting ourselves to feeling good, living in gratitude, and really just deciding, let athletes decide what goals they want to achieve and how can we help support them achieve those goals, instead of I don't have enough, now I have to force this to happen. And then what happens is when women maybe have a different perspective, it's like, well, we can't make time for that. We can't make time for team building because we got to fucking train.
Yeah, that's that soft stuff. We don't have time. We'll get to that when we have time, which is hilarious on its face, because when you look at all these teams, I don't care what team you're on, like the issues that you're talking about, I bet they are actually front of mind in terms of if you were to ask the coaches, like, what are we struggling with right now? And yet it'd be like, well, our turns aren't very good. We're going to work on it for, 5 minutes every other week. But like, I don't know why they're not getting better. Like, it's just like, it takes time. Of course it takes time. It takes resources. It takes effort. It takes planning, all this stuff. Like it's stuff that coaches know. I don't know a coach who doesn't know that is how you improve at something. And yet, even as people are gaining greater awareness for it, the way that a lot of organizations are still distributing their resources in that stuff is not aligned with what the actual situation is on the ground. There's a piece of this though, like where you talk pretty openly about the way that, and I taught you about this on the phone because there's some pieces of what you're reading where I go, I relate to the hierarchy stuff, and I go like, that's right in my wheelhouse. That's what I experienced as well in these situations. But I certainly don't can't recall ever, for instance, what you cite here, my head coach, like making a comment about my body, right? How I looked. And I guess talk a little bit more about that experience, and how common do you think that experience is for women that are working in this space?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's in swimming or other workplaces, there's just this over hyper focus on our bodies. And even, it wasn't always necessarily just projected at me, but just comments on like, oh, she's got a great body, or she's such an athlete, or she looks so good. And like just internalizing those messages. And I think it's the perfectionism, again, connecting to like external validation. And when my perspective now, like we can look at even the diet culture in our society, which is a whole other rant I could go on, but yeah, my perspective now is that if we just keep women obsessing over their bodies, and they think that when my body looks a certain way, and this happens for men too, it's like when sure. I have this body, then I'm going to feel confident, or I'm getting all of this validation from the people outside of me. It's like, if I lose 5 pounds, people are like, oh my God, you look amazing. And it's like, right. I could look amazing because I hate my life right now, and I'm trying to control my body because I feel so out of control with everything else. And that's what happens. And inside of that, validation is really suppression of self. And that's what I was talking about when women are obsessed with, I just have to lose 10 pounds and then I'll feel confident to do all these things and actually start standing in my power and my voice and speaking up and making an impact. That doesn't happen, because you have to change the beliefs. And if everything you're taking from your environment is you're going to only get praise or noticed when you look a certain way. Right. Like I would get comments like, not even people that intentionally want to harm me, but like, hey, you're the best looking coach on this pool deck, or your boyfriend. Right.
Nominally, they think they're paying you a compliment, but like, if you think about it for 30 seconds.
I'm like, yeah, thanks. I know I'm really hot. And it's like, but that's like not what I want people to see me for. Like, I want people to see me and be like, she's fucking brilliant. She is going to impact the world. And, looking good should be more about knowing that I'm taking care of myself. That right. This is my body, because this is my body when I feel good about myself internally. I'm eating well. I'm sleeping well. I'm exercising in a way that's supportive to me, not 20 hours a week, because I got to keep up the athlete body that I had when I was an athlete. And I do notice that with the clients that I work with, when we have a consultation and we talk about things, it's like they want to feel better in their body. They want to lose weight. But those things happen, like naturally they can start losing weight when they have more compassion and love for themselves, and they realize like, actually I'm a brilliant woman and I have something to say and I have something to impact the world with. Then like, they're not obsessing about their body weight anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's this paradox, right? So like, that you get caught in this loop, and I know it because I've suffered from disordered eating, and a lot of it had to do with how I felt about how my body looks. You get caught in this paradox where you go, I'm unhappy with how my body looks, so I'm going to be cruel to myself in order to get my body to look better so that I'll feel good about myself. You never complete that loop. Like you being cruel to yourself creates more pain, and the pain keeps you where you are. I I've been on a journey with that in recovering from it. And, I'm lucky. I have a really good friend that, gives me, he's a professor of nutrition. So he gives me a lot of common sense advice on certain pieces to do. He's helped me a lot to be more compassionate to myself in the way. And I do share like progress pictures with him, but one of the things I'll always point out about the progress pictures is my before photo. I'm smiling in the before photo because the first thing I had to do was figure out how to look at myself in the mirror and go, I like that. Like that couldn't wait until the end of the process. Like I couldn't start from I'll like myself or I'll be kind to myself later. It never worked.
Yeah, it's all connected because we can't create a body we love from self-hate. We can't create a life we love from self-hate. And what's coming up for me now is like there's a video of a rat, the rat dopamine study. It's like, okay, if you get this validation, your body looks a certain way, you get dopamine because people are like, you look amazing, or you have all these achievements and people are like, wow, I wish that I was as successful as you. And it's literally the same idea. The rat is in this cage and it's got a plug into its brain. So every time it hits this lever, it's getting dopamine. And over time, it's conditioned. So the rat is just sitting there and it's just doing this. Yeah. And eventually,
pull the lever.
Doesn't eat, doesn't drink, doesn't sleep.
Right.
And that's exactly what happens to us when what we get from society and culture is this constant validation and praise from achievement. It's like, and I wrote another post about like, stop just idolizing athletes for their achievements because it's just so much pressure. Like, do we care about who they are as people?
Right.
And it's so hard to get past the dopamine because it's an addiction. I mean, we got these too, where our dopamine is so messed up. We have to really think about what are we going to feel like when we get there. And dopamine feels it's an addiction.
I mean, one of my biggest pieces of advice, if I have an athlete that achieves something that like they're like, this is the most amazing achievement, like they get there, they reach that top of that mountain. What I tell them time after time after time, turn your phone off for like 48 hours because it is so destructive actually. And like, yeah, like, am I super proud of my before and after pics? Yeah. Will I ever share them to social media? Absolutely not. Because it would be the biggest mistake I could make in terms of what I'm experiencing in terms of like progress on myself. Because I would just hop on that dopamine roller coaster, I think. And 48 hours, God, it would feel amazing. What comes after that? Not good. I know I'm wise enough. Took me 39 years, but I'm wise enough at least to figure out that part is not there. Okay. I want to try another one of these posts. Okay. You have a reel, I guess is what I would call it. When you say what nobody's talking about and you have a point there about imposter syndrome. Talk a little bit more about what we were getting at there.
Yeah. So I've really just been thinking more and more about how do we, the major pain point I would say that the people I work with struggle with is that they're really successful. They've got it all on paper, but they don't feel that internally. And so many of us struggle with that in this culture. And I think it's, again, from being very out of balance in this masculine energy. And it goes with the dopamine because we're just on that train constantly. And the reality is that being a human, we're emotional beings. We have to experience emotions. We have to fail. We have to struggle. We are going to be sad sometimes. I was going through the emotions that I've been going through the last 2 weeks because I'm getting ready to move and I threw my back out. It's like defeated, panic, stressed, pressure. And what's different now is that I actually take time to sit in that, to feel it, and then decide how do I want to respond and move forward. And what happens, I think, with imposter syndrome is we are in this go, go, go constant energy where we experience doubts in our brain. And then what happens is we believe the doubt. So we're like, oh, I've been training for 6 months and I'm getting closer to taper now and my brain's freaking out. And so now I got to go do more stuff. I can't actually just slow down and relax. And that's what we do. We play that cycle out in a million different ways, where if we really learned to create emotional safety, to be in the body, it's like, I'm not going to die if I feel panic in my body. What does that feel like? And the more you do that, the more the brain is going to stop giving you high alert for like every little thing. You're like, I have to go speak up for myself. And your brain's like freaking out.
Oh no.
Oh no, I better go like write another research paper, or write 8 more books, or get another certification before I can ever do that.
Right.
But if we just teach our brain and our body, if we come back into ourselves and we can internally let that process through, there's different ways to move emotions and energy and all of that, then it moves through the body and it's like not as big of a deal. And then we have all this other space to remember, like, why am I really good at this job? Why am I valuable? But we can't get there if it's like taking a kickboard and you push the kickboard underwater because you're like, I don't want to feel any of those doubts or emotions or any of it. So you push it down, and then, you know, you've seen this at practice. The kickboard comes up and knocks out
Smack in the face. Yeah.
You're like, damn it. Why did that happen? So
I literally had an athlete tell me last night at practice, Nikki, he goes, he's wonderful with the stuff that he shares with me. You know, because I learned so much from it. He goes, I got to that. We're doing a really hard practice. He's like, I got to that point where I'm just mentally blocked again. I want to keep going and I want to keep, you know, like going faster, but I feel like I can't. And I'm just trying to avoid thinking about that. And that I said, okay, but that's where we've got to do work right there, because you will not solve this problem by not thinking about it. Like that's unfortunately, you actually have to experience what you're going through. Fighting against the experience that you're going through is where the work is for you. And I think so many people have internalized that message, like, oh, well, negativity is bad. So if I just don't be negative, I'll solve all my problems. I think I really agree largely with some of the critiques you have of masculinity, and I have a nuanced point that I'm kind of working on, that I'm workshopping, that I'm just going to share randomly here. And I can see maybe you're frozen as well again, but
I'm still here.
You can still hear me.
Yeah.
Amazing. I think that, again, there's been a failure of leadership by men. We have allowed the wrong guys to define what masculinity is. And so, yes, the large popular definition of what masculinity is ends up with all these negative consequences for both men, women, everybody that exists in society. And, you know, I have empathy for my fellow men on the level that, you know, there are aspects of being a man that are more sink or swim than anything else, right? Like if you look, I know that IQ is an imperfect way of measuring intelligence. I'm not going to suggest that it is, but if you look, like if you measure women and men on IQ. You will find roughly the same average. But what you will find is far more men in the distribution of where you would classify somebody as having a mental disability, and far more men on the other end. Like, that is, to me, evidence that life as a man is, on some fundamental levels, like more sink or swim. If you're on a dating app and you're a woman, you're more likely to have people reach out to you, even though that can be often a horrifying experience, than an average guy. But we've taken that sort of sink or swim circumstance of our life and extrapolated it to, that must be just the way life is. And we're either at the top inflicting pain on everybody else, which is a miserable existence, or we're at the bottom and we're receiving the pain, and hoping to get up to the position where we can inflict pain on other people. And I just don't think, again, I have that feeling in my heart where I go, this is how everybody has taught me how it is. It's not right. It's not right. Actually, even if I go back to somebody like George Kennedy and what I really admired about him, okay, if being masculine is really about being strong, right? If that's something we associate with masculinity, what is strength? Strength to me is you can empower other people who are in a less favorable position than you. Not that you can inflict pain on somebody else. It's quite the opposite. So I'm hoping, like I said, I'm workshopping eventually that, I can start to, in my coaching, redefine what masculinity is in a more sort of pro-social and frankly positive direction. So that the things that you're talking about as a critique of masculinity become less and less valid because we've redefined what it is.
Yeah, I think two things come up from that. And number one, I think we have to find balance within ourselves in masculine and feminine. And that requires really being honest about, what do I need? How do I take care of myself? And especially for men, because they do experience a lot of pressure, these head coaches of elite programs, and you got to win and you got to get the bonus and you have to put athletes on the Olympic team. And if you're not doing that work to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, and a lot of those cultures don't allow for space for men to actually take care of themselves. They're struggling with all sorts of health issues, which is just really, manifested, unprocessed pain in the body.
Yeah.
And so, number one, people have to come back into balance and say, what do I need to support myself? It's not normal to never take a vacation. It's not normal to never take a fucking day off. You don't have to, the day that you're off is the day on Sunday while you're catching up on recruiting. And I just went back to back Big Ten weekends. And then 2 weeks later, I got to go back to back NC2As. It is not a normal thing to put yourself through that. And that's fine. Sometimes we're just going to be out of balance, but we have to figure out, how do I refuel myself after that? It's really important. Yep. So that's the first piece, is coming back into balance for ourselves, whether you're man or woman. We all have masculine and feminine energy. And number two, I think my idea of masculinity is holding space for the feminine. I think this in myself, if I really trust in my masculine side, I'm going to be able to do what I need to do to get myself moving forward. But I trust that so much that I create space for my feminine, which is you know what, my back's flared up and I got to take a day. On Monday we were going to talk and I was I have to be with my body right now and take care of my body right now. I'm not going to be able to give of myself if I don't feel where I'm at and take care of that. And I think, that's something that male coaches can do. Let's really what the masculine is like, I feel so grounded in myself that I can hold space for what my athletes are going through. I can help support them. I'm not afraid of their emotions. I'm not afraid of their struggles. I'm not afraid of their challenges. I just know that's part of the human experience. But I think because so many coaches are actually really afraid to be vulnerable and admit that struggle and to say, you know, I might need to go to therapy myself. I might need to get a coach myself. I might need to process years of things that I've been through as an elite coach, you know, never having time to spend with my family, never being allowed that. Like, that's just, it's not normal in elite cultures. It's like, well, you got to compromise, like literally give up everything in your life so that you can be you can be on the Olympic staff. And it's like, okay, the day after the Olympics, what do we do? Well, it's ready for the next one. It's like, let's just slow down a minute and think about how am I feeling? What do I need? How do I, you know, fuel my body? How do I help myself so I'm not in this like chronic stress? And then when you're in that chronic stress, what happens is the only way that you can feel better is to win, to get more, to manipulate, control. It's like you're feeling so much stressed internally that then that becomes projected externally.
And you've lost all perspective, right?
Yeah,
on what it is you're actually doing.
At that point, you're like, here's the dopamine lever. Let's go.
So I'm aware we've gone over time. Do you have time to talk through one more? Because I did want to get to your third. Okay, so this is going to be a long one, and I'm not apologizing for that because this is great stuff, guys. So just keep listening. This final post, I think it speaks like it. You've made such an amazing transition to it. You know, it starts some of the most glorified. I'll just read this. You know, I know I'm stealing your voice here. Some of the most glorified coaches I've encountered in elite sport are not good coaches. That's the opening 2x4 across the forehead that comes with this one. And I say, amen. This is a point I've been trying to make for a long time. And gosh, I haven't found a real warm reception for it. So I'm happy to give one other person a warm reception for it. Like, where are we going here? Let's go on this journey together.
Yeah, I just, you know, at the end of the day, we have to know ourselves. We have to know what we value. And I think there's so much misalignment with that. And I'm sure you can relate to this, but there are times in recruiting where it's like, I'm selling these values. I'm selling a false reality that I know is not actually what's happening where I'm at.
Yeah, you're selling we're a family, but you know it's an abusive family.
Yeah, we're all a family. We value integrity. Meanwhile, it's like, if you don't break the fucking recruiting rules, then, you know, you're not going to be a good head coach and you're not going to win. And it's like, I just don't want to break the rules. I don't want to. That's just not who I am. I'm never going to, if I have to be a head coach and I don't win because I'm not breaking every rule and I'm not Snapchatting my athletes at 10 p.m., well, then I guess that's it. I would rather not win. And I've seen that like so many times where you sell something and you're like, we care about you. We want you to grow as a human. Like, we really want to teach and embody these qualities. Yet, again, it's all of the pressure, the expectation, the dopamine. It's like, when you're actually in it, nothing that you're selling and recruiting is what you're doing as a coach. And some of the coaching is, what I really think about is, it's always about the energy, because most of our communication is nonverbal. 93% of it is. So it doesn't matter.
That's why we're doing this over video. We had a discussion about whether we were going to go to audio because of some of our internet issues, but then you're right. We'd be leaving a lot of the communication on the table. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you understand really the mind and emotions and how that all works, if a coach is stressed out and thinking, I'm so much better than this athlete and they're a piece of shit, and they're frustrated, right? You're not doing what I need you to do so that I can feel good.
Right.
That becomes projected. It doesn't matter what you say. It's how it's said. And, in my coaching, I believe in being direct. I am direct. I tell people how it is, but it's about the intention behind. Like, I will be direct because I want someone to see where their blind spot is. It's like, oh, well, if you want to achieve this time, and these are the things you need to do, this is what I'm seeing you're doing right now. What's in the way of that? Because your actions aren't in alignment. And so it's not that I don't believe in directness and challenging, but it's the energy and the intention behind it. And if it's from frustration of, I need you to do this so that I can be okay, you're projecting to some athlete, you're not good enough. You're a piece of shit. I don't value you as a human. Like, all of those subconscious thoughts that are happening and then become communicated non-verbally, that is then internalized for so many athletes. And I know this because I've been working with athletes, elite athletes, for the last year. And I'm like, why don't you trust yourself? And it's like, well, this coach called me a bitch, or this coach did this to me, or said this about my body, or made me feel like I was a failure, didn't acknowledge me after I stopped achieving for them. Just, I got injured, and then they were like, I don't really care about you anymore. And so I just have noticed where this all comes from, and it does impact lives for the rest of their lives. These are people that are moving out of sport, but now they're stuck in those things that they've internalized, and they can't express fully, their gifts, because they don't trust themselves, because some coach has projected, you're not cutting it. You're not good enough.
Well, I think what part of what you get to here, and that resonates with me, is that yes, the coach gets into this situation where they are so frustrated and they're chasing that thing, and I think you actually make a really good distinction that it's not necessarily. They may come across, or you may be perceived as somebody who's directly communicating, but when somebody that you're coaching is not doing what you want, and your response is to attack their person, like attack their self, that's actually kind of passive aggressive in its own way. Like, what would be direct would be to say even some version of your internal discussion where you go, do you know what? I deserve to have a good experience doing this too. And when I come to practice and I try to tell you something that you could do to get better, I'm not having a good experience. But that requires a level of vulnerability that is not encapsulated in, you're such a piece of shit, get off the wall and go. Like, you have to admit that you're a person with feelings that brings your own, stuff to whatever you're doing. And it's certainly quite a bit harder. And what I see in coaches, and why I think the work that you're doing is valuable, and why I think what I'm doing is valuable too, is I see coaches that are in an incredibly stressed situation. They're at the end of the rope. They're out of tools in their toolkit. And that's when they go to this. That's when they go to...
And the kid's like, the athlete's on full scholarship. So you're like, this kid's on full scholarship. Right. And now I got to manipulate and control. And you know what? It really does. It sucks when someone that is on full scholarship is like not loving swimming. But number one, sure, is that a result of the environment? Number two, they might just be burnt out and they might just not want to swim. And as a coach, what you were saying is being vulnerable enough to say, like, something's not working here. I'm not enjoying my experience of coaching you. You're not receiving the coaching. So what's going on? Like,
Right.
my coach Jim Steen would always ask people like, do you really want to do this?
Yeah.
And it's okay if you don't, but if you're going to do it half-ass, then go do something else. And I think that is something that is different when you have scholarships, but it still doesn't change the fact that you can't manipulate and control another human being without really negatively impacting their self-worth for the rest of their life, because then they feel like they're doing things out of fear. Like they're afraid that if they don't do what this coach told them, that they're going to lose their scholarship, or they're going to be shamed in front of the team, or they're going to be bullied, or whatever it is. And that experience is like walking on eggshells. They will carry with them for the rest of their life.
Right. Right. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Before we go, I want, anybody who's listened to this, I want them to be able, if they want to know more about you, if they want to reach out to you, if they want to engage you for something, do all your plugs. Tell people where they should go if they want to do those things. And then I'll do my own plugs and then we'll sign off.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fun combo. So thanks for having me and giving me the space to share. I really appreciate it. Haven't been back fully in the swimming world since I left. So, and then you can find me at my very original business name handle.
Yeah, search for Nikki Kett Coaching on Instagram,
Nikki
right? I guess we shouldn't do the whole URL.
It's also URL. My email.
Okay.
NikkiKettCoaching@gmail.com. And then I'm dabbling.
2 Ks, 2 Ts, right?
2 Ks, 2 Ts, yeah. And I'm dabbling on the TikTok world, but I'm not sure everyone wants to hop over in that arena yet, because that's a
I'm terrified.
Hole for sure.
Yeah, I'm terrified. You're braver than me if you're dabbling in that. I don't think I could withstand TikTok I've got more work to do, I think, before I could do that. Yeah. Thank you to everybody for listening. If you want more positive psychology-based content from me, and occasionally a shared post from Nikki in an Instagram story, Christy_coach on Instagram, Christy Coaching on Facebook. This podcast will be shown on a YouTube channel where I just got a new handle. So if you go to youtube.com/ChrisDCoach, just all straight in a row, no underscore like the Instagram. You can find that stuff here. This is released as a podcast. It's available on iTunes and Spotify. So subscribe. Subscriber numbers are going up by the day. I'm really excited to see that. One more time, thank you to everybody for listening, and we'll be back again next week.